I was raised in China's matrix. I was conditioned from childhood to solve complex problems, memorize information efficiently, and perform at the top of my class. But I was also conditioned to do the exact opposite. My mind was wired to reflexively stop thinking entirely at given moments. Here's the paradox. Millions of students like me go through the same system that seems to severely restrict the very critical thinking so crucial for innovation. And yet, China has built one of the most powerful tech industries in the world. Even now, amidst reports of top AI engineers in China facing exit bans, such as the recent Manus case, the system continues to accelerate. Every year, China produces 4 times as many STEM graduates as the United States. Almost half of the world's top AI experts were trained in China. If critical thinking is so important to innovation, how does a system that actively discourages it still function so well? The truth is, from the inside, it doesn't even feel like anything is missing. And this is not merely theoretical. We saw it play out at a UK university recently. Associate Professor Michelle Shipworth at University College London had been teaching her Data Detectives module for over a decade. The course featured a long-standing critical thinking exercise, which included asking why China ranked second globally in modern slavery numbers, according to the Global Slavery Index. However, in March 2024, in a class where a quarter of the students were Chinese, many complained to the college, calling the course provocative and biased against Chinese students. Instead of defending academic rigor, the head of the department chose to cater to this group of Chinese students and removed Professor Shipworth from her course entirely. The official justification was that courses must remain commercially viable and retain a strong reputation among future Chinese applicants, who bring massive fee income to UCL. And this is where it gets interesting. Instead of applying critical thought to the question, these students collectively treated the exercise itself as fundamentally unacceptable. How does this happen? At first glance, it looks like a straightforward intellectual failure. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This reaction makes perfect sense inside the system we were trained in. We were never taught to question everything. Instead, we learn to distinguish between questions that fall under the critical thinking category and those that do not. This conditioning is not simply a matter of being brainwashed. It involves far more push and pull. When I was growing up, China's information environment was far more open than it is today. Google was accessible. Independent publications existed. I remember reading thought-provoking newspapers and books from my father's bookshelf, which have since been quietly outlawed. At one point, I even wrote a school essay criticizing the Chinese education system. I argued that it focused too much on trivial issues and not enough on reflecting upon historical mistakes. My teacher praised my insightfulness. Driven by an aspiration to uncover the truth through writing, I went on to study Chinese language and literature at Nanjing University, one of the most esteemed institutions in the field. However, it was not what I expected at all. Whenever I asked professors or peers questions beyond narrow academic topics, I was swiftly silenced. Questions such as, why was all Chinese history before 1912 labeled feudalism when it looked more like autocracy? Why was one half of the 20th century emphasized while the other was quietly erased? This was not because people lacked intelligence, but because they understood the trade-off. If everyone around you aspired to work for a top-tier state-run enterprise after graduation, asking such questions risked your exclusion from the game. I realized my insightfulness was entirely redundant. That was for me a truly blue-pilled moment. Once that boundary is established, you focus only on what gets rewarded and what moves your life forward. In China, that means one thing: optimization. From a young age, the century of humiliation was taught as a central theme in our history textbooks. It was a national trauma, treated with a famous Chinese proverb, 师夷长技制夷, learn the advanced technology from foreigners to control them. This concept is deeply woven into our national historical narrative. The solution became obvious: master technology, optimize everything. And it worked. I saw this firsthand when I entered the music tech industry. In 2014, I shifted my focus to digital music production and moved to Shanghai to become an assistant to prominent tech-oriented composers, including the composer for Genshin Impact, the fastest-growing video game in the world. For the first time, my life felt aligned. My skills were rewarded by China's rapidly booming gaming and film sectors. My progress was validated by national and international recognition, and my pride in the advanced musical equipment manufactured in China was entirely genuine. For a time, it felt as though nothing else mattered. The earlier discomfort, the questions I was not allowed to ask, simply faded into the background. This is where it becomes counterintuitive. Restricting certain types of critical thought does not actually slow people down. In many cases, it makes them faster. After certain boundaries of thought are drawn, you stop wasting energy questioning the walls, and you start optimizing the space inside them. And once I saw this pattern, I realized something deeper. It wasn't just education shaping our selective critical thought, it was also the language itself. Historically, the Chinese language was often described as a burden because you needed to memorize 2,000 characters just to be literate. But today, with digital typing, that barrier has vanished. Furthermore, the Chinese language now demonstrates even higher efficiency than English. Its tonal distinctions and visual complexity maximize semantic density, allowing a Chinese speaker to convey nuanced ideas with far fewer syllables. Take this English sentence. This piece of junk app is secretly draining my cellular data in the background again. That's 24 syllables. It takes about 5 seconds to read. In Mandarin, the exact same sentence is 这破软件又在后台偷跑流量. That is 12 syllables. It takes only 2 seconds. This efficiency is especially visible in mathematics. Numbers are short and rhythmic. Multiplication tables are memorized through chanting, making mental arithmetic second nature. For example, 6 times 7 is 42 and 7 times 7 is 49. In Chinese, we chant 6 7 42 7 7 49. It is incredibly condensed. From childhood, we are trained to process calculations intuitively at lightning speed. We're trained to treat thinking itself as a cognitive efficiency engine. Faster answers, cleaner solutions. Over time, for Chinese citizens, thinking becomes less about questioning the premise of a problem and more about answering the given question as efficiently as possible. So this isn't just about language. It reinforces a deeper habit, treating thinking as optimization, not exploration. We now understand that a restricted education promotes optimization, with our language serving as the engine. Yet this is still not enough to explain how the system produces happy, innovative tech talents. To understand that, we must examine a deeper-seated motivation replacement driven by online culture in today's China, a phenomenon that is widely misunderstood. Before we go further, I actually made a full breakdown of how the selective online policing system works in China. I'll link it below if you want to delve deeper after this, because what we are about to discuss here is built entirely on top of that system. Most people assume state control relies purely on brainwashing propaganda, but in reality, Chinese propaganda is largely ignored. It's repetitive and predictable, and citizens don't take it seriously. So the system evolved. It didn't force people to believe anything. It made the truth feel irrelevant. Over time, serious discussion is replaced by entertainment. Debate is replaced by distraction. Eventually, people stop seeking out uncomfortable ideas, not because they are strictly forbidden, but because engaging with them is emotionally and socially exhausting. This creates a culture of hyper-hedonism, where comfort is the ultimate priority and cognitive dissonance is avoided at all costs. In this environment, critical thinking doesn't disappear, it just becomes invisible. And what's invisible doesn't get defended. Intellectuals still exist, but to survive, their serious ideas are hidden behind paywalls to avoid censorship, or they are repackaged as pure entertainment. For example, when the famous Chinese intellectual Xu Zhiyuan reflected on China's totalitarian state in his book The Totalitarian Temptation, published a decade ago, it was censored immediately. Yet today, with his publisher arrested in China and his academic journey erased. He has shifted his focus to heavy engagement in the hedonism of pop culture. He sustains his identity as a pro-liberty late-night talk show celebrity based in China, while significantly reducing the visibility of his initial political advocacy. For tech talents, this vacuum of rational debate became the fertile soil needed to build dopamine engines. It birthed short-form video platforms like Douyin, which evolved into the global juggernaut TikTok, and incubated a gigantic gaming industry that is rapidly taking over the world market. This hyper-hedonism results in a loss of immunity to critical voices in China. When you present objective evidence proving their worldview is flawed, many of them don't debate the facts. They dismiss your argument by attacking your motives, accusing you of trying to undermine their hard-won, willfully blind happiness. I experienced this personally. When I began speaking out about my Uyghur classmate at Nanjing University, a talented ethnologist who was arbitrarily detained without a fair trial for many years during the mass detentions in Xinjiang. Many friends in my music circle blocked me immediately. They didn't argue with me. They intuitively cut me off because my words fell outside the domain of permissible questions, threatening their comfort within the ecosystem we had built together in China. That was when critical thinking stopped being abstract for me. I felt the weight. I regained the critical thinking that was briefly introduced to me as a child and restarted my exploration of how the system really works. In addition to all the cultural reasons I've mentioned, there is one crucial objective reason this system is so effective: scale. We've been taught that innovation requires creative and critical thinking, but what if that's only true for discovering new ideas, not for scaling them? China produces millions of engineers and technical workers every year. Entire industries can iterate at a speed that is mathematically impossible to match elsewhere. You don't need every single individual to be a visionary innovator if you have millions executing flawlessly. At that scale, problems don't need to be debated, they just need to be assigned. But this system doesn't operate in a vacuum. It is amplified by the global economy that surrounds it. Over the past few decades, many Western countries hollowed out their own manufacturing capacity and outsourced production to China for lower costs. This severed the link between production and scrutiny. Supply chains stretch across borders, but accountability for property and labor rights rarely follows, largely due to China's speech control architecture. This is where the system becomes not just powerful, but essentially untouchable. Questions about the true cost of China's model are no longer allowed to be asked because of this global scale. No journalists, whether Chinese nationals or from overseas media, are allowed to investigate forced labor at state-run mining sites, which are common in the upstream supply chains of almost all frontier technology around the world, because doing so would violate espionage laws by exposing state secrets. Look at Canadian Liberal MP Michael Ma. In a March 2026 parliamentary hearing on EV and aluminium supply chains, he grilled an expert on China's forced labor practices, repeatedly demanding to know if she had personally witnessed them and dismissing reports as hearsay. Chinese state media celebrated the moment as a win. Ma's past leadership in an organization linked to Beijing's United Front network helps explain this performance. The lack of investigation inside China on these issues, combined with China's stranglehold on global tech and critical mineral supply chains, creates powerful incentives that can co-opt critics even inside Western governments. And this is where the system stops being domestic and becomes global. We might still harbor the illusion that Western media criticism of China's forced labor is oversaturated. However, we often forget that it only feels this way because the complete absence of direct research and reporting in China creates a vacuum on an unimaginable scale on the other side of the planet. Not only is Western research insufficient to compensate for that vacuum, but researchers in the West are also increasingly facing intimidation from the Beijing regime. Look at what happened to a Stanford researcher recently. After exposing the Chinese regime's forced labor practices embedded in its industry and global tech supply chains, she was directly targeted by suspected Chinese government agents. The FBI confirmed last week she was under physical surveillance right on the Stanford campus, while she received a barrage of harassing calls that mentioned her mother back home and demanded she drop the work. This is textbook transnational repression, proof of how Beijing's tech power gives the regime the reach to intimidate and silence critics even deep inside American academia. Subsequently, raising questions about those supply chains becomes increasingly inconvenient everywhere. Western institutions have learned to actively cater to this willful blindness. To keep their seat at the lucrative global chess table, institutions compromise. The UCL incident I mentioned at the beginning is just another perfect illustration of this. The psychological cost of this compromise is immense. Chinese tech talents find validation in their autocratic system, not just through their industrial might, but by watching the West willingly trade its civilized values for financial scale. The West forgets that individual liberty, academic freedom, and free speech are the very principles that initially ended the global slave trade, secured property rights, and created the thriving free markets we rely on today. If the very Western institutions that preach those values are so quick to abandon them, why would you expect a Chinese engineer to risk their career, their freedom, and their safety to fight for critical thinking? When you put all of this together, the paradox is explained. As long as the global establishment rewards that system based on its scale, without challenging Beijing's authority to dictate which questions fall under the critical thinking category, the model seems incredibly effective. But the real question isn't whether this system works. It clearly does for a while. The real question is what happens when the very questions it avoids confronting at all costs become the only ones that matter. If you found this analysis helpful in understanding these complex realities, please consider subscribing. And if you need more vocabulary to understand exactly how this architecture of control functions, check out this long video essay I made recently that breaks down China's selective online policing machine in detail. Thank you for watching and stay well.